very welcome to Legends of News. This is the podcast that talks to the journalists who've had a front row seat at the very making of history from the last half a century, and indeed plenty more. We'll be hearing from the people who were on the spot when the most extraordinary and significant events unfolded right in front of them. Many of them are colleagues and rivals, sometimes both, during my own 40-odd years in broadcast news. And today's guest really doesn't get more legendary. And for so many reasons, he's recognised from Paris to Pondicherry, Westminster to Blackpool, and probably every lock and pub on our canal system. He is none other than John Sargent. You're very welcome, John, to Legends of News. How does it feel being a legend?
Well, you start off thinking, oh, well, of course, it's just irritating if people suggest you're, a treasure or something, you're a legend. But what I did like, I was passing a couple of people the other day, and one turned to the other and said, ledge, referring to me, and I thought that was just lovely. I thought it was the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me in the street, because they're passing, so they're not asking for a selfie, they're not saying who are you, and all that business. They're not saying which channel do you work with, all that stuff. Just ledge.
It was nice. It wasn't as in throw yourself off one.
No, as in throw yourself off, it wasn't. No, it was just pure sort of, well, I would regard it as adoration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Legends of News, in your case, going back to the very start, might not have been news. You might have been lost to comedy, of all things. How did that come about?
Well, it was all rather strange. I mean, I was determined to be a journalist from quite a long way back, and in fact, I went to America when I was a student, and I was there when Martin Luther King made his "I Have a Dream" speech. I was in the crowd.
I was going to say, a lot of Americans were there in America. You saw it.
I saw it. So I went to America, and I was working as an accountant, would you believe? But I was a gap year student. But I thought that was pretty amazing, and I did think, hold on a moment. And as we went across on the Queen Elizabeth, that was how you got to America in those days. And we had a thing called the Ocean Times we read. And in the Ocean Times...
So this was a daily paper on board?
A daily paper on board. And so I'm going to America, and I saw this headline saying, War Minister says he didn't know her. And, of course, it's Profumo saying that he didn't know Christine Keeler. And so I thought, now, wait a moment, if it's in the Ocean Times, he's lying. And when it turned out he was lying, I thought, wait a moment, this is actually the job for me. I think I could do this. So I was committed to be a journalist. But then when I got to Oxford, I spent a lot of my time writing jokes. Because when I was young, I wanted to be a comedian. All right, they're not laughing now. I know the old joke. But in fact, that's what I was keen on doing. And so I thought the sensible thing to do is to become a journalist. The sort of fun thing to do would be a comedian. I thought, I'll do the sensible thing. So I got a job with Reuters lined up for the autumn of my last year. And I then was offered a wonderful part in the Oxford Review at Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festival. And so I thought, I just do that, just one last fooling about time, and then the prison gates will close, and I'll be working as a journalist. And then, so that was the plan, and it was a marvellous show. And then one night we were told that Alan Bennett was in the audience. And all the people who were going to in showbiz, most of the people there wanted to be in showbiz. And when he invited us the next morning to the pub, you can imagine all the excitement. And Alan then just turned to me and said, would you like to be in my television comedy series this autumn? And so there's a groan. Can you imagine? This bloody sergeant is the only one to get a job lined up for the autumn, and Alan Bennett's offering him a job. And so I said, I was so shaken by this. And I said, I'm not sure my father would like this, to Alan. And he said, oh, why? And I said, well...
Very good.
I said, look, he's been a vicar, and he didn't like your sermon sketch in Beyond the Fringe. And in fact, he thinks you are personally responsible for the decline of the Church of England. And so Alan said, oh, dear, but what does your mother think? I said, look, mothers are different. if their son's going to be on television, they're going to like it. So that's different. So I did do that.
What was it called?
It was called On the Margin.
Right.
And I played lots of different parts and things, but the main thing was, of course, and what Alan liked was I wasn't at all showbiz. So I'd arrive in the morning, read the newspapers and things, and we weren't show busy. The whole operation wasn't show busy, and he liked the fact that I would, of course, support him. And the person who didn't get the job, this may be why I got the job, a bloke called Michael Palin.
Who he?
I wonder what happened to him.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he was obviously the top comic of my generation and the top review person. He was just a year before me, so he wasn't in that particular show. But you see that Alan wanted, of course, someone who wasn't going to outshine him. And was just
Did what he was told.
And also would have something about him, which I suppose he must have thought I did have something about me.
I wonder if any copies still exist in the
because
archive.
in
No,
those
they
days,
used to wipe
they
them, didn't
wiped them. Oh, no, they thought, this won't last. It's a bit of old nonsense. But we won the Comedy of the Year award, and we were on BBC Two twice, BBC One once. So it was an amazing success. So that was all fine. But by the time the awards came in, I decided, hold on a moment. I actually do want to be a journalist, and I got a job as a trainee reporter on the Liverpool Echo. So that's where I was when all this stuff was coming in.
I want you to park that because I have to rewind a little bit, and I don't know how many years precisely, but I have to rewind to the Martin Luther King speech because there are so many events as journalists. I mean, I never went to anything as momentous as that, of course, where you don't realise just how important it is, just how seismic, just how world-changing it's going to be. Did you get any inkling there, or were you just a gap year student going, in a big crowd, aware of the significance of the civil rights movement, but probably didn't even know too much about Martin Luther King?
I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know who he was. I'd crossed the whole of America with someone, a student I made, a friend of, and we travelled across America, and I saw the apartheid, which is what it was in the southern states, and the whole place was boiling with racial tension. I was in Alexandria, staying with a family, and they were frankly racist. The father and the mother were racist. They had a black maid, and I would sometimes offer to drive her back to her home after a shift, and they were very upset about that. But they said, okay, as long as she stays in the back of the station wagon.
Wow.
The idea that we might actually, and she was just I just had an ordinary relationship with her. No, so that the whole thing was quite extraordinary. And on the day of the March on Washington, they said to me, Johnny, you going downtown? I said, yeah. And they never said to me when I got back what I had seen or done. They just thought Martin Luther King was just a revolutionary. I mean, that he was trouble to America, and they hated him. I mean, it's quite simple. Yeah. He was causing trouble. So then I got to the March on Washington, and it went on and on. We got about to speech number, 15, 16, 17. Suddenly this guy stood up, and he started talking about having a dream. And I was on my own, right? And I thought, that's pretty good. My father was a preacher, so I knew, I knew the whole thing about context and how you make the great speech. I'd studied speeches. I knew what I was listening to. I thought, God, this is good. This is amazingly good. And when he was shouting, he started shouting about the names of various places, Chattanooga and various things in the speech. And as he shouted the names of places, people cheered back. So the whole operation, 250,000 people there, was like a Baptist gathering and a religious gathering, which, of course, I deeply appreciated. Because of my particular background. So I just thought, actually, this guy's amazing. And, of course, I then heard Lady it's a good speech. Yeah, Martin, is it Martin Luther King?
Were you ever interested, mentioning that and your father's background, ever interested in going that route in terms of the avenues you could have followed?
No, but, of course, what it meant was people like me have been in public life as a vicarage child. So, I've been on the public stage since I was, 4 or 5 years old, as it were, and consciously there. And when I was 7 or something, I had to read a lesson and on a box. And there was no question of saying, I don't do this, 7 or 8. No, that's the family business. So although I wasn't, and I'm not at all religious, I was brought up in that atmosphere, which was extremely useful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that goes a long way, John. I'm thinking, to explaining your super relaxed on-air style. It didn't faze you. You were just thinking, this is no big deal, I'm guessing.
It's just somehow you find that you're sort of, the key to it all, of course, is that you create this persona, your own persona, but it's a broadcast persona, and it's like a writer finding their voice. For a broadcaster, you should be able to plonk down here or anywhere else, or in Riyadh or wherever you are, and you should just be able to speak to a little camera with a black circle, and you should be the same person. And so after time, once you've found that sort of persona, you can then bring it out, as you know, Dermot. You could bring it out from an old bag or an old, old rubbish bag or something and said, I put it on. What do you want, a minute? Do you want 2 minutes? Do you want half an hour? Do you want me rambling on about my life? And in an awful way, yes, you can produce it. That's part of your experience.
Well, we're going to get to the heart of that in a moment or two, but I parked you at the Liverpool Echo, and the question is more about the how at this point, because a lot of people who are interested in this business, perhaps getting into it in the early phases of being in news, thinking, well, it all sounds remarkably easy. He thought he could have been a comedian, he could have done this, he could have done that.
Yeah.
He decided to become a journalist, and lo and behold, you mentioned Reuters, Liverpool Echo. The path was never that easy. I'm guessing you're looking at it in terms of the progression. This is what happened, but it was the school of hard knocks, wasn't it, to get there, just to get the foot in the door?
Yes, and of course the other thing is that, curiously, although I was applying for jobs for a news agency in the first place, Reuters and these other things, the interview is where it counted. So, curiously enough, it's sort of both as a comedian or someone writing jokes or anything else, the whole essence of we're talking, it meant that, if I had any skill at all, it was to get through to someone quite quickly and talk. And of course, when I was a kid, I was always talking and arguing and things. So, curious enough, I was chosen as a writer by a news agency and then by the Liverpool Echo as a journalist in a non-talking role, as it were. But I was chosen talky. So again, it was all sorts of strange. This is why it's very difficult to give people advice, because you're coming at this thing, be a comedian, make sure you've got a theatrical presence. Why? So you can walk into an interview room and be interviewed by the editors. And often they were pretty incompetent as interviewers. And I would then get cross sometimes. And there was such a weird moment.
Well, as a young guy, you knew them. They clearly didn't intimidate you.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. That's it. And of course, that's the vicarage training too. You are used to meeting the squire. You're used to meeting the bishops. You normally sit on the the lap of the bishop or something when you were little.
Steady
put on
now,
the
John.
knee. No, I know this is steady, and it's a controversial point. But in those days, we didn't think that was abnormal. We just thought, get on the knee of the bishop, perfectly all right. He won't do you any harm. But anyway, and I went to a talk recently with the Bishop of London, very nice woman, and I told the people that I had sort of. Before, normally I would sit on the knee of a bishop, but I thought I'm not going to try it with the Bishop of London.
Okay.
So that's what I do.
But very relaxed. And I want to ask you this about with the print background, the writing background. Yeah. Do you think that was important to the broadcasting career as well? Do you think it gave you some grounding? I actually went through that route myself. Started in a local newspaper before I got into eons in broadcast news, and I always did find it quite helpful, sometimes just in the, in the speed of reaction and the requirements then of written journalism to get it out and get it printed?
It's sort of yes and no. I worked very hard in Liverpool over 3 years. It was unusual. I was on a course for sub-editors, but I failed as a sub-editor. And I'll tell you this story very briefly why I failed. So one evening, it was in the chief sub said to me, "Could you put an 18-point italic crosshead on that?" And threw some copy across at me. And 18-point italic crosshead, as you probably know if you ever did a subs course, but that meant virtually 2 words, right?
Right.
I mean, it's italic, but across in a column. And the news flash was that Che Guevara had been killed.
God.
Now, I knew who Che Guevara was because I was politics student and things. He wasn't famous. People didn't have his head on their T-shirts and things. But I thought, my God, Che Guevara killed. And they said, and 2 words, and you've got to hurry. Come on, quickly. How are you going to discuss this? So my comedy came in immediately, because that's what I do if I'm frightened. I tend to sort of make a joke. And so I thought of Chow Che. And then I thought, no, this is not going to work. So I didn't put Chow Che on. But that was my first reaction was a joke. And the second reaction, oh, God, this is too much, really, in 2 words. Dead is is it the second one?
What did you come up with then? What did they accept?
Well, actually, after 10 minutes, and then it was getting on towards 15 minutes, and I handed it back and said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And they decided, the chairman called me in a few days later and said, well, did you agree you didn't make it as a sub? And so the news editor decided that, the only possible thing to make this guy is obviously not to make a sub-editor, make him a reporter. A twist of luck, just like that. Mess something up, mistake, opportunity. And so I was then, they found it difficult to get sub-editors. Everyone wanted to be a reporter. I was allowed to be a reporter for 3 years. And the writing side of it was, of course, terrible. But just going back to your original point, it was important.
And just on the environment, let's just remember, so this is the 1960s, isn't it? Mine was years later. But male-dominated, not too many university degrees around as well. Clatter of typewriters, a cacophony of sound, and smoking.
Oh, all this, and of course the drinking.
Oh yes, of course. I left that bit out.
No.
Get to the pub as quickly as possible.
Because when I got to the BBC finally as a reporter, the editor complained about me, and a word came down that not happy with Sargent, and why? Because he wasn't drinking enough. How can we get to know this guy if he's not drinking, And they were, of course, all alcoholics.
I thought that was going to go another way there. I thought, he's come from print. He spends all his time in the pub. Keep him out of the pub.
Oh, I didn't tell you what the headline was they finally put in that story. So I got overexcited about that. No, the headline they finally did, which I saw in the next day's paper, dissident killed. Can you imagine what a stupid thing. So me worrying about what we should say, of course, they should have changed they should give me more time for the headline. They should have altered the instruction. 2 words, stupid, dissident killed, absurd.
Exactly. So you get to the BBC, how?
Well, I get to the BBC, oddly enough, because they're splitting. They're always reorganising things in all big, like the NHS or BBC. We're going to reorganise everything. So they decided, having joined all the reporters together, a small group of people who would do television and radio, they then decided to divide them. That'll be brilliant. So we'll have radio reporters and we'll have television reporters. So they then advertised in UK Press Gazette for reporters. So I set off from Liverpool as a reporter, Liverpool Echo, right at my last year. We were indentured, by the way, so like slaves. You couldn't.
I was too. Indentured.
I
mean, well, let's just explain that. You've signed up for 3 years.
Once they'd agreed to take you on, you were there for your 3 years and you couldn't apply to any other job. So anyway, at precisely that moment, another bit of crazy luck, BBC advertising for reporters. So I then think, right, I'll try and do this, and I think it'll be okay. So I set off. I was all ready to go to London the next day, and my landlady said that she had a message for me. So I said, "Oh, and what's that?" She said, "I'll read it out to you. It's you've got to. They want you to prepare a 3-minute piece based on previous day's news." So I thought, how am I going to do that? So I thought, no, I'll do a funny piece. So typical me. This is me. Like, I think, okay, no one can write a funny piece like I can. Not who is applying for this job.
Yeah,
it'll put me into a different category straight away, and I'll be able to do it quickly. So I wrote a humorous piece based on the previous day's news. And
can you remember any parts of it?
No, it was all to do with a letter to the Times, someone written a letter to the Times, and I then quoted that and turned it into a sort of little 3-minute humorous piece.
And then did you perform it as well?
So when I arrived at 5 Portland Place, the commissionaires, there were these commissionaires in the BBC, full of uniforms and medals and things, because a lot of them are ex-servicemen. "Have you got your piece?" And I said, "Yes." "Well, follow me." And so the commissionaire then went into a studio. I didn't know what it was, but it had no windows and a great big microphone. And it was just coming up to the time of the interview. And at the time of the interview, a voice said, "All right, go ahead in your own time." So I then read my 3-minute piece without a fault, which was good. "Right, come up to the 3rd floor." So up to the 3rd floor, and there are then the whole people, all the board are sitting there, 5 people, who've been listening to this. And the editor of Radio News, Peter Woon, had his feet on the table, literally had his feet on the table. And he said, "Yeah, we're not really listening to the piece. We just want to hear your voice." And he said, I think it was suitable for a school magazine."
Oh my God.
Right across the table at me.
Yeah.
So I then looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, "Yes, I think it would be very suitable in a school magazine." And gave him the full hate, "You are a bastard, I can't stand you, look." And he took his feet off the table, and he just thought, "Oh, we've got one here." And so the whole thing, I thought, I'm not putting up with this. I've come all the way down from Liverpool, and I'm not being messed around by you people. I'm cross. And of course, that's just the right kind of attitude that they want in somebody.
Do you think that was deliberate strategy by him?
Well, no,
kind of, we want somebody who's going to kick back.
Well, there's that side of it. He just wanted to unnerve me because he thought, "A little snotty bugger. Let's just simply cut him down. The moment he comes through the door, let's give him a bit of hard time. Let's give him a bit of torture." And I think the way that I respond to that, obviously, he liked a lot because he was a former Fleet Street reporter.
And you're going to get that in your job.
And he was
powerful
tough.
people you're talking to.
So there was no doubt that bit of it was part of it. But the other thing, which I only learned 30 years later, right? 30 years later, because it took them ages to decide. There was a letter saying I'd not got the job. Then another letter said, "Peter Woon would like to see you, the head of Radio News." So I came down to London again. It altogether took about 3 or 4 months from that interview before I was accepted as a BBC reporter. Anyway, 30 years later, on my last day, I was then chief political correspondent of the BBC, and then my line manager threw a brown envelope across the table at me. It really was a brown envelope. And he said, "Have a look at it." Opened it up, and it was the reference that Alan Bennett had written for me for that job 30 years before.
And you had no idea?
I had no idea. So I picked it up. I thought, God, and I really was so taken aback and so pleased because, of course, he was very flattering about how clever I was and funny and all that, and how he'd much prefer to hear me doing a news report than anyone else that he could hear on the radio. So anyway, I said, "Oh, and can I have this? Could I take this?" And they said, "Of course you can, John. It's only a copy." Yeah. Now that is important because it meant it was from the BBC archive, and it meant they'd kept the reference. So somebody had decided, actually, this is an important document. This young guy's being taken on, and 30 years later, it's still in the archive. So what did that mean? What it meant was that they chose me largely, or I think a great deal to do with the fact that Alan Bennett had given me this strong recommendation. Why did it take so long then, if he was the magic answer?
Yeah.
Because, and I only thought about this later, as often with BBC boards, by the time they were seeing me, they'd already decided who was going to get the job. They didn't have any money to pay me. They couldn't employ me. And therefore they desperately, as usual with the BBC, said, look, can we get some extra funds? They'd chosen a guy called John Simpson as one of the people.
I mean, again, another one.
Just these odd people turn up. Anyway, he'd been chosen, other people had been chosen, most of them internal candidates. They'd certainly not chosen anyone from a regional newspaper. So how was it I got through all this? Well, of course, it was Alan Bennett was the answer.
I mean, if it was possible, he goes up even more in my estimation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he got you that job.
And of course, it then turned...
Lovely man.
And of course, why did I get the Liverpool job? Because the managing editor, not the horrible man who finally said I was no good as a sub, the managing editor had seen the programme on the margin, thought I was brilliant.
Yeah.
And also thought it was exciting that I should go from being, as it were, a little television star to arriving in Liverpool as a trainee in their newspaper.
Are you still at all mates in contact with Alan?
Oh, when I see him, he was with his partner when I met him not very long ago in Cheltenham, and the partner was a bit surprised as to how it was that I knew Alan, Alan knew me, and Alan just turned to him and said, he was there at the beginning, you know.
That's lovely.
And it was just sort of, you know, the whole business of him and how much, and I followed his career, of course, very carefully from a distance. Every now and then we meet, and of course, every now and then I get excited. And
he offers you a role.
No, it's just a wonderful. That's a sort of, you know, so he was my patron, as it were, a lot of the time without me knowing it. Liverpool, BBC. A great chunk of my life. And then eventually, this is later in the story, when I then chaired How I Got News for You and was on those programmes and doing comedy programmes, they then, of course, some people looked it up and realised that, in fact...
Yeah, you had the chops, you had the bones.
So the whole idea of me larking around in the later part of my career was founded very much on the fact, look, this guy, when he was 22 or something...
But to the people that didn't know that, I mean, it was an absolute revelation.
Yeah, revelation for them. But for the old stages,
that's the audience.
And the old ones, and the people that knew me, just up to his old tricks. His old tricks, not new and exciting and different, but he's just going back to being normal.
Yeah, but, you know, it's kind of like, you know, he's Mr. Serious John Sargent. He deals with really heavy-duty politics. I always thought he had a twinkle in his eye, but my God, look how funny he is. Yeah. We'll get up to that in a moment or two. But because we are going, you know, because it's so fascinating. Oh, yeah. Do you still have a copy of that reference that Alan Bennett wrote?
I did have, because I wrote about it, and I was looking for it the other day, couldn't find it, but it's somewhere. It is somewhere.
Sure it's online somewhere. Yeah. But then, John, right, so you joined the BBC, you're a reporter, and you go to Vietnam.
Yes,
you go to Northern Ireland. You know, and
I do. No, it's horrible. No, and of course you look back and you think, why did I risk my life? This is very dangerous.
Well, you were just a general reporter, and
I was general reporter. You just send you, and of course after a bit, I used to go to Northern Ireland on and off for 7 years in a sort of regular basis, because we used to pretty well staff it. There was always one or two national reporters who were there for radio, and, you know, I got to know everybody. I mean, it was a tremendous place to learn, but very frightening and very dangerous.
Absolutely. What about Vietnam, though? So was that one trip there? Or
so it was one long trip, but an awful problem about communication. So you'd have one radio circuit every week. And I was there. I was a few hundred yards away from the famous scene of the little girl, naked girl, running down the road. And I did see that, but I couldn't get any way out. It was more of a television story than a radio story. So although I'm sort of proud of the fact that I went and I did these things and went to quite large parts of Vietnam, I didn't realise it until afterwards that the reason why they sent me, this was in 1972, was because it was the North Vietnamese were coming down. They thought that Saigon would fall. And they thought, we must have somebody there. Oh, Sergeant. Put
Expendable.
him in. Expendable, exactly. He means nothing. No,
He won't get on the helicopter.
No, all right. Now, one other story, briefly, because it is important. It's sort of how did you make your career? Why was I chosen to go to Vietnam? Right? I've been in Northern Ireland, so okay. That was because one weekend I was on duty, broadcasting house, and they said, look, John, there's been the QE2, there's been a ransom demand. And they said if the ransom is not paid, 40,000 quid, to a New York address. If that's not paid in New York, they're going to let the bombs off on the QE2. That's what the security people think this is serious. So we're going to take a plane up, and we want to put you on the plane and go and find the QE2. So I take off. Martin Bell's there doing television, but I'm in the radio position. And by the time we get to the QE2, which is 1,200 miles away, I'm sitting in the co-pilot seat, and I'm communicating with the radio operator on board the QE2, and we're circling about 2,000 feet above the ship, and it all looks fine. And so this is now 20 to 8, right? So I have no time at all. I said, can we talk to anyone? The bloke said, no, I'm afraid you cannot talk to anybody. My instructions are that nobody is allowed to give interviews. I said, oh, it's a pity. But what I could do for you is I could connect you to the BBC at Broadcasting House. Would that be useful for you? I said, well, actually, it would be. So I'm like, God. So I then think I've got to scribble something down. I can't really complete it. But I then just did a straightforward piece about, if you didn't expect anything to be happening, you would think this was normal. We're 1,200 feet above. But, of course, I didn't know the SAS had dropped. SAS men had arrived by parachute before they'd come down, and they'd searched the whole ship, and there were no bombs.
I've never heard about this.
So it was made into a film. I don't know who played me, but I think it was Brad Pitt or something. Anyway,
yeah, of course.
But the point about it was that it was a Hollywood film, and of course it turned out to be a hoax, right? Complete hoax. But I was the lead story on the 8 o'clock radio news, then listened to by millions of people everywhere. I mean, it was just a big news outlet, and I was the first item. And they just thought, oh, that's pretty clever.
Yeah.
He must be a good reporter.
Yeah.
So pure luck, the whole thing.
It's the breaks, but then it is down to you to take advantage of them being able to broadcast that rapidly.
You've got to broadcast. So you then got to do your number, and you mustn't an R, and you've got to be very articulate. And so you can achieve those results.
Politics then.
Oh, right.
I mean, okay.
Yeah.
So general reporter, huge amount of experience. When did you make that leap into the politics department? When did you make it into television?
Well, they first wanted me to go into, because I had a degree in politics and philosophy and economics, BPE, so they thought, he knows about politics. So when almost very soon after I arrived, they said, go down there. So I went down to Westminster, and I just thought, I can't stand this. And so the editor at the time, the political editor at the time, said, but wouldn't you like to, over time? And I said, well, of course, if I was injured or something. But the whole idea that I would, as a reporter that wants to go out and see the world and meet people, the idea that you'd be stuck at Westminster, I just thought was terrible.
But weren't you fascinated by politics with the degree?
I was fascinated by politics, always fascinated by politics, and that was perfectly true. But I just thought, I'll leave this. I want to have adventures. I want to go out and see people. I want, and what's it like to be bombed? What's it like to be shot at? All these silly things. You look back and think, why? But if you want to be a reporter, you want to be a sort of archetypal reporter, which is, you go there and there are guns and bullets and all this sort of thing, and you're typing and the bullets are coming over the typewriter, and there's the dream of being the great reporter. So I'm living in this fantasy world. And I don't want them to be stuck with, about politics and, do this. And there's a statement on this and part-time working, regulations, and you can deal with, all that stuff. No, you don't deal with any of that stuff. You want to be there and being brave and running and all that stuff. So, a kid, really. And, of course, once the BBC says you can do that, you then think, it's the pride and the excitement of it all. It's ridiculous. I look back and I think, what a crazy way to behave. So don't get me wrong. This is not an advertisement for that kind of reporting. I thought it was dangerous and frightening, and I wasn't very good at it. But anyway, then of course, when you get to the stage later on, where actually I would like to be a political correspondent, then the BBC says no. I mean, it's sort of classic no. No, because they want you doing other things, and they want someone boring at Westminster. They certainly want anyone who might make a political remark. So people like me,
heaven forfend.
People like me making jokes, telling stories. So hold on a minute, this man is just completely the wrong guy. So I had a terrific struggle. They sent me to Paris. They sent me to be all sorts of other places. I went to New York. I went to Dublin. I was acting correspondent in all sorts of places. But I just said Westminster, and I thought, oh no, not him. And anyway, eventually, having presented the Today programme and all sorts of other things, they then said, oh, well, if that's what he wants to do, So they put me into a board, and I was also suitable. I didn't pass, but I was also suitable. And somebody then packed it in, and so I got the job.
You didn't get Alan in again. Oh, I mean,
No.
you didn't know about that. So, I mean, Thatcher, we have to, there is one so-called greatest hit, but earlier on, the very beginning, the election of Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister, you got quite an exclusive interview, didn't you? Through quite a novel mode, didn't you have to?
There was
the radio interview.
You know this story. That was it. That was when she.
Was that when she was elected leader?
It was when she became Prime Minister, and she was on the stair. She came into Tory headquarters, and there were about 200 people there, and I was right at the back. And suddenly she appeared with her family, on the famous picture of them on the staircase, and I thought, oh God. How am I going to get through? So I literally crawled on all fours right the way on the floor.
Between people's legs.
And I then popped up and said, oh, hello. And of course she loved that. I mean, that was a sort of she had no sense of humour, but she was sort of playful, and she very much, and I very quickly got to know her. But I got to know her particularly well when I then went to Moscow with her, and I'll tell you that story. Why? Because my eventual really big scoop with her was in Paris. But I'll try and quickly tell this story.
Tell the Moscow story. When was that? Was that Gorbachev era?
That was Gorbachev and Reagan and Thatcher. They were running the world. Now we get one person running the world, but in those days, there were three of them, and she was on her way to Moscow for the first time to see Gorbachev, and everyone was very excited in the build-up to this. We were all mugging it up and thinking, God, this is going to be a great meeting. But when we got to Heathrow, I have to say, reporters are like this, we were so pleased it was an RAF plane. Which meant the food was going to be better, and there'd be fantastic wine, and there wouldn't be any of this plastic, knives and forks, with proper linen and knives and forks and crockery. So anyway, the plane took off. We were a group of journalists with her, and Bernard Ingham, her press secretary, came down and said, you can have your meal because she's not come down to see you for a while. So a fantastic meal. I had 3 glasses of wine, vintage wines, and a whole thing absolutely wonderful in front of me. And suddenly Margaret Thatcher appeared at my side. So being the gent that I am, I'm stood up, and all this crockery and food went onto the floor. So, I just thought, oh, God. I didn't mean this to happen. And she then, this is what I was saying about her playful side, she said, you stay where you are. I'll sort this out. Meaning, you are an idiot male. And she loved playing this. She's the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Did it with the cabinet, didn't she?
And she just sort of, and there's me sort of red in the face and a young man and, quite a bit younger than her. But she could sort of, all right, flirt.
Yeah.
That was what she did. She liked men, and she wants to sort of play with them. And so the real staff rushed forward, collected all this stuff up. And she then just did that on my nose.
Oh.
And because it's all radio, right? So I then whipped out a microphone. We went straight into an interview. 15 minutes on why are you going, what are you doing, what about this, Gorbachev, and all the rest of it. But now, why was that important? Because this was in 1987. Right now, 3 years later, she was in Paris up against it because there was a MP's ballot for her leadership, and she was in deep, deep trouble because Geoffrey Howe had attacked her, and many of them thought she'd lose the next election. So this is 1990. I'm standing outside, and the result comes through, and Heseltine gets 152 votes. She gets 204 votes, but not enough for her to avoid a second round. So I've got all these charts. Thank God, she's had it now. And I thought, has she had it? Well, I don't know, but it's obviously very serious. So I had no idea she had resigned 2 days later as a result. But I looked at her, I thought, oh, well, if I was her, I wouldn't come out. I wouldn't give an interview now. So I said to one of the people from number 10, is she going to come out? No, she won't come out. Second, she'll consult with colleagues. Yeah. So the moment the camera came to me, all this was in seconds before, Peter Sissons was the newsreader and said, well, John, what's the position? I said, she's not coming out. It's this, consulting with colleagues and all the rest of it. And then, it's a great moment, Peter Sissons then shouted, and I saw it on the recording, John, she's behind you.
It's like pantomime.
And it's pantomime. So out comes Margaret Thatcher. But my earpiece was not working very well. So I didn't hear that. And so I'm sort of... and then somebody jumped up in front of me. I thought, what's all that about? What's happening? And so I then thought, I just want to look... I'll have to look behind. And you think age passes. In fact, it's just a very short gap. I then turn and she's running. She's literally almost running towards me. Bernard Ingham sees her coming towards me and my microphone and starts pushing me aside. And someone else then pushes me aside. So you get this extraordinary, and I said at the time, you don't expect to have a sort of battle with members of the number 10 staff.
Live on air.
Live on air. And of course, they're trying to get her past me so she talks to all the journalists who are lined up behind the crash barriers. So now, why does she stop? Why doesn't she just do what Bernard wants her to do and go and talk to the microphone we've been set up to? Why? Because, of course, she knew me from the incident on the plane and all the rest of it. She knew exactly who I was, and she thought if I talked to him, I can unload my feelings. I don't have to have all this stuff.
And this was we fight on, we fight.
And this is, I intend to go on, all that sort of thing, and go into the second round. And I want to thank everyone who voted for me and all that sort of stuff. And she then swept out. But of course, it was fantastic. So I was embarrassed. I said she was going to come out. She did come out. But I quickly realised, hold on a moment, this is a great moment in my life.
Well, and that's right in the core of this podcast. That legendary moment, award-winning. Of course, I know you don't do it for that, but
yeah. So, but isn't it extraordinary? So the whole sequence. So I'm telling you the whole story partly because it's a good story and the food and all the rest of it, but because again, it's this question of she knows. This is you're there, and all you've got to do, all I had to do, is to be calm. That's all I've got to do.
Yeah.
I've got to be calm, make sure. And the other curious thing was, don't run towards her. I was working with a cameraman, a French cameraman. I hoped he was on a wide shot. You start running, he may not be able to follow you.
Yeah.
So just stay where you are. They'll come towards you. And of course, that's a theatrical trick. It's how do you get attention on a stage?
Again,
because you're going way back. You get attention by being still and that's how you upstage other people. You upstage them literally because they come towards you in a scene because you're still. So do you
think you consciously did that, or you just by that stage you just had it?
I had a sort of that theatrical thing in my makeup by then. It was. I mean, it's the fight or flight thing. It's just sort of, for me, if I'm really rattled, A, I'll try and make a joke. B, I'll stand still. B, I'll be thinking about it. I won't shout something stupid or obscenities or anything. That's how I will respond to kind of fear and not trembling, but fear.
And what about that relationship with Margaret Thatcher? I mean, how would you define it? As much as she ever could,
Yeah.
like a journalist, would you say that she liked you?
Yes, and she liked me because she liked the fact that I wasn't party pre, that I wasn't supporting one party or the other. Because a lot of the time at parties, she would come to me, and she'd just do that with her head, meaning you can ask me a question. Mm-hmm. And there was one occasion when she came up to me and sort of positioned herself in front of me, and there's just her and me. And so I, of course, ask her a question, and then she nods. She wants another question, and she's preparing questions she wants to know what the relevant questions are at that moment.
Yeah.
So you see, for her, and people think, oh, she's always banging on and shouting and overriding other people. Her skill was that she often was very much on receive, not just transmit. And she wanted to get something from you. And, of course, it was, someone like me who she knew I would behave properly, as it were, and she liked me, and I would play the game. And that was the basis of the relationship was, and she knew I wouldn't be frightened of her, and I'd look her in the eye, and I would sometimes think, God, is she talking to someone behind me?
Behind you again.
But the other thing which is funny was when you arrive at number 10 for a party, say, you go up the staircase, and she'd be there, standing there, and she'd put her hand out, and if she liked you, the other hand would come across to hold you in position, and she'd then look at you. And you obviously had to say something interesting. So I would try and say something interesting. If you didn't, suddenly she'd pull like that, and you'd end up talking to Dennis.
Now, I'm talking about relationships with journalists. Yeah. Reptiles, I think amongst other repeatable
Bolshevik
words.
Broadcasting Corporation for the BBC. No, so he wasn't an ally. But no, she just thought, look, I want quickly to get the questions. I want to know what these people, these not horrible journalists, but I want to know what the journalists are up to, and I can get through to this guy, and I can do this. And she'd put her hand on my arm, which in those days they do it all the time. Now I keep brushing, women off. They're taught it.
But
now that tactile stuff was unusual, and particularly for a woman prime minister.
And you think genuine. I'd be really interested, John, on that receive and transmit issue with Margaret Thatcher because of the nature of the downfall. When clearly she was just on one channel transmit.
Yeah.
How did she lose that? And do you think all prime ministers, certainly ones with so much power, after a while, end up in that position? Because we'll move on, but we've seen it with other prime ministers that, they lose the ability to read the room, to read the party, to read the country.
Yeah, they do that, but also they lose the ability to reinvent their persona. That's one of the problems. You see, if you're not very well known, you can then change what you do quite radically. You can be friendly, you can be cross, you can listen. But if you're as well known and you're then cemented into that role as Prime Minister, after a bit, it's very difficult then to sort of say, look, forget I'm Prime Minister, how about this? Let's go out and have a drink. No, you are then in this position, and they're all isolated in that strange way. It's not just a matter of their arrogance and the fact they are constantly transmitting and giving orders to people. People treat them in a very different way. And, of course, once they stop being Prime Minister, I remember at Westminster once seeing Howard Wilson, ex-Prime Minister, walking down the corridor, and you think, what a funny little man that is.
Yeah.
But, of course, when he was Prime Minister, the walls would appear to expand as he walked along with his aides and people. And, you thought, this is the power of the land, and this is position. So they are, in a curious way, like all of us are trapped in various roles that we play, but the role of Prime Minister, so to get Thatcher to say, look, I think I better campaign for re-election. And you see, she didn't bother to make sure the rules weren't so easy. All you needed was 3 MPs, and there was a contest every year, annual contest. Well, you see, someone more worried about their position would have said, no, I think a bit more than that. Of course, it's much more now. You can't have 3 MPs just saying, well, let's have a contest. So the whole way that you're expecting her then to behave, which is, I better go and talk to some people and say, would you mind voting for me? No, stuff that. I mean, she just couldn't.
Yeah.
To then say, oh, no, because it would seem so creepy, and she would want to be, in her own way, genuine. We all want to be genuine. We all want to be direct.
Yeah.
And she was remarkably direct. It was one of her great characteristics. She would go straight for the point. Well, now if you say, no, don't do that, weave about and sort of, why not be a bit more charming, particularly to the women MPs, as she used to sort of, didn't like the women MP, didn't like women journalists. So, but say, oh, no, be nice about this, do this. She'd think, oh, fake, be me. I'll be me. And that, of course, is the downfall. Right. That's it. So the whole thing combines after a long time. They're out of touch. They appear to be just giving things out the whole time and not taking things in. That's the nature of it. It's the nature of politics, the fascination, that they wear out all their tricks. And
do you think that trappings of power you describe as, the Harold Wilson one, I mean, but did that work? So we're moving on into the 90s then. John Major, Thatcher's successor, unexpectedly, the grey man.
Because
no
he wasn't
really saw him coming.
Because he wasn't her.
Yeah,
and
he wasn't Heseltine.
And so when he was, when they were, on comedy programs, they would sort of have him dressed, Spitting Image, having dressed him in grey.
Yeah,
he liked that.
Oh, did he?
But the reason why he liked it, because people were advising him, look, John, they would say, look, John Major, look, John, you don't want to look like her or even think as if you're her. You want to be completely different. So it was a great source of strength.
I mean, the enormity of his election victory in 1992, unexpected. I mean, he was behind all the way.
Yeah.
One big enough majority.
Oh, yeah, no, it was good.
But then struggled for 5 long years with seemingly no authority in the country, traduced as a grey dull man within his own party, fighting the what turned out to be the Brexiteers. In those days, he used another B word about them famously off mic, well on mic, but off broadcast, and just got snowed under by the enormity of the job. And the country actually was growing, wasn't it? The economy was doing well.
The trouble is once you get one of these battles, like in the previous period with Labour, it was about nuclear disarmament. You think, well, these are... blimey. So there's this quite odd argument when you look back on it, tearing the party apart, every single, moment being fought. And, of course, with the Conservatives, it was Europe. And who really started all that, in a way, what made the issue so alive was Margaret Thatcher. And she felt... these people have bloody well tried to stop me because I'm anti-Europe. And they're the real enemy. So you then had effectively 2 leaders of the Conservative Party, John Major and, wait a moment, Margaret Thatcher.
Backseat driving,
but also causing enormous tension. So that tension, of course, there are lots of other things that went wrong, but broadly speaking, the real issue was the fact that she had set alive this fire which wasn't going to be put out. And Major then had to fight it the whole time. And, of course, eventually they lost and Brexit was carried through by Conservatives. And, the Conservatives got rid of Thatcher, but then they changed. I mean, this is politics in the raw, but for a political journalist, magic.
Let's get to the point where you and I crossed careers when you became the political editor of ITN in the early noughties. The Blair era, of course. We worked together on the Blair second election, another landslide. And I remember it so well because nothing happened. I think one seat changed hands. And I was in the green screen studio with a virtual House of Commons all ready to go, and swingometers and everything. One seat went from the Labour Party to the Conservatives. But that's by the by. It was just Blair. Was he really, looking back now, was he the heir to Thatcher? Different politics, but just that ability to communicate, to command.
Well, he had all that, yes, and he always gave the impression when you interviewed him that he was listening to your question, and he might even try and reply to it. He'd work out some sinuous way of answering it, and then he would pause for you to ask another question. Oh, this is all rather good. I'm making contact with this guy. No, he was very adept, very, very adept, and he would always have a wonderful way of now it seems almost ridiculous, but if he was presented with any kind of political problem, he would say, yes, but it's a question of either this or that, and that this was disaster, or that was what he wanted you to think. So everything was phrased in this way, which made it you think, oh, so these are the alternatives. And of course, in real life, there are usually many more alternatives, but he would sort of put it in these rather neat phrases. So you either want crime to pay or not to pay, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it was all now, a lot of this is rather sort of, frankly, old-fashioned, because people can see through it. But he had that youthfulness and the excitement of him, and he looked good, and he had a wife and kids and the whole thing. And he just looked and of course he was quite prepared to change and manoeuvre. And as he still does, it was that was him. But sometimes, people think, oh, what you want is someone with an absolute rigid policy, and they'll succeed because people will think it's authentic and that this is a principled man. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes to get this sinuous creature moving about in subtle ways and appealing to different groups, that can be politics at its absolute best and top. So there's no one type of politician that you dream about. No. Everything depends on the time. So when people say, but shouldn't X or Y or Z have become Prime Minister? Weren't they the best Prime Minister we never had? And I then say, look, just ask yourself the question, at that precise moment, what was needed? At the moment that the opportunity is there, what did people think was the great requirement? And, of course, the great requirement can be not Thatcher. The great requirement can be peace rather than war. All sorts of variants of that. But if you're not allowed to ask that context question, to say, oh, but he was so clever and he was so this and he was so adept, forget it. Just work out when is this brilliant person going to come through? And the joy of politics is that over time these brilliant people do come through.
It's a great test, isn't it?
They're the answer to the problems of that day at that time.
Understand the problem, and you understand the kind of politician.
If they fit, you get political success. You get combustion.
John, why was I privileged to work with you as a political editor? And you're never a political editor at the BBC. Is that one of the reasons why you left the BBC?
It is one of the reasons, yeah. No, I think they just thought, I don't know. They've never. I met one of the top people, and I said, I virtually said to him, look, hold on a minute, why didn't you think it was a mistake? I could have been political editor of the BBC. And he said, this was all right, we had a few drinks and so on, and he said, you got better.
Ooh.
And
do you accept that?
There are elements of all that, aren't there? I mean, again, this question of timing and what they want to do at a given moment. But what the BBC will never do is they will never then say, we made a mistake. There is a sort of collective, we're always right element, and you've got to live with that. So once you've failed to get that sort of job, don't expect by hanging on they'll change their minds, because that's too much for
Things
them.
move on and other people come up behind you as well.
And also, it's embarrassing. It means they're hopeless. It means they've run out of ideas. It means they're no good.
Yeah.
And, of course, they're desperately concerned, the managers particularly, to spend most of their time trying to make sure they survive and make sure they look good, and not so concerned about whether you look good.
But, of course, you worked at the BBC with one of the legends who's sadly no longer with us of political reporting, who's I don't think he's remembered enough now. John Gold.
Yeah.
I mean, he
was brilliant.
What a relationship with Thatcher.
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah, and altogether, a tremendous, and of course for me, a wonderful sort of mentor and someone that could teach me how to do it, get me through the minefields. I mean, sometimes I would sort of say to you, when I was political editor or when I was chief political correspondent, I'd say to the young political correspondents, look, you're here to learn what's happening. Try and work out all these different plays that when someone is attacked on the floor of the House of Commons, don't be surprised if he turns to his friend and appears to be talking. They're not having a real conversation. They're just deflecting the view that they're sort of caught in the spotlight. All these little games are played. You've got to get to know all of these things. And it takes time. The idea that you can be a newsreader, dare I say it, one of the great newsreaders, but the idea that you can learn about politics from a distance. Some of these people in current affairs, frankly, and newsreaders, they can never know because you're there all the time day after day after day, hour after hour of discussion. That's how you get your expertise, and then you can be light-hearted and funny and sketchy, because you know it. You really do. You know, you're a taxi driver. You learnt the knowledge.
And demonstrated it. You've earned it and demonstrated it to the audience. We're nearly out of time, my goodness me. But I mean, there's been a lot since you walked away voluntarily from the formal world of political reporting. I mean, my goodness me, John, you are, a Renaissance man from barging, dancing,
that's
trains.
all.
Is that just having fun? Because that's back to the early years, isn't it? Thinking, I actually like this industry. It may be, it may have been politics for a big chunk of it, but you know what? I actually like taking a barge up the Grand Union Canal.
No, when I first applied to the BBC as a student, and and they said, sort of, what would you like to do in the BBC? I said, I'd like to go through every single department, I'd like to work in all the departments because I've got all sorts of different interests. And, of course, they didn't even give me an interview. They don't want to hear that nonsense. I want to work for the BBC. No. So another curious things, in the end, you say, hold on a moment. Apart from the sports department, which I only did bits with.
I'm sure you could have done that.
I did go through almost every single department of the BBC in every single aspect of reporting and presenting and all kinds of things, television, radio, endless documentaries, flying Spitfires, a whole thing. And I did it because I just wanted to do the whole thing. I always did. That was from that point of view, it was sort of childish ambition. I wanted to make jokes. I wanted to be in comedy programs. I wanted to make sure that I'd done big documentaries on India or something.
And you have, and
then I'd make lots of speeches and things. And have I got news for you? And how did I get the ITN job, the ITV job? Because the editor of ITV, the news editor, was watching me on Room 101 with Paul Merton.
Yeah.
And he turned to his wife, both watching it, and said, "Do you think he should be our next political editor?" And she said, "Yes, he'd be fun."
Let's nearly end it. I've got one section after this bit, but Strictly. Now, was that on your list, or did they have to persuade you to do Strictly?
No. The strange thing was, I didn't think it was terribly important. I just thought, I'll probably be knocked out early on. And I'd been 5 years out of Westminster, so I didn't think of myself as a serious political correspondent. But, of course, 5 years for people who are older, they just think there's nothing. He suddenly is political correspondent. Next moment, he's dancing. So, but for me,
sort of dancing.
I thought, sort of dancing. But, you see, it never occurred. I was a bit startled to find that I did have to learn to dance. I thought that was going to be, oh no, it'll be all right. I'll sort of get through all that. And during the summer beforehand, I thought, shouldn't I watch some videos or something about people dancing? And I thought, I can't be bothered. I'll just turn up and it'll be okay. And it then occurred to me, it took me some time to work out, that of course you're trapped, because what if you're then removed after the first week? You think, humiliation. You think, I'm not good on humiliation. Not really. No. And the other thing you realise is that the partner that you're given, you start getting on with her and enjoying being with her, her whole career then depends upon going through all the stages.
There's a responsibility.
So then, all this is new. You suddenly realise, A, I'm having to dance, and the first test was, can you walk backwards? So I thought, okay. And it turned out I could walk backwards rather well.
Hey.
But the only thing I could do, walk backwards. So they were impressed by that. Anyway, no. So you then settle down, and of course you don't take yourself seriously, but you have to take the dancing very seriously. And of course, this is again the comedy training, that the idea that comedy is larking around. Oh, no, it's not. No, comedy is re-larking, as it were. It's going back over something which you know is funny and trying to reproduce it so it gets the right joke at the right time and it's funny and it's paced properly. And, of course, that's what you've got to do with dancing. You can't make it look funny or look anything or look as if you're enjoying it, because you're not really enjoying it, you're working. But to do the whole thing requires an enormous amount of work and concentration, so to make it look easy, to make it look as if you're enjoying it. So you don't have to be a brilliant dancer. But, of course, the other thing you've got to do, I treat it like a by-election. You've got to get the votes in, and the votes are the audience votes.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm a political correspondent, effectively, as most of me is still that. And for me, the idea is, can I get the audience going? And what are they going to do? And of course, we were then a fascinating couple. I was twice Christina's age. And we were clearly just, what are they going to do? And then what are they going to do? Gosh.
And then
they've done this. And hold on a moment, he's now swirling around his head. How's that been done? How have they got to that stage?
Well, how did you come up with, and given your knowledge of that and the sketch writing and who came up with the dragging a coat around the floor?
No,
that is the image. They show it every year again.
Exactly, and that's Christina Rihanoff. I mean, she had a very good eye for comedy, and before the Paso Doble started, of course, she said, "Now look, John, don't smile, don't smile. I want you to look serious." And remember, this is for lots of people, lots of military people. When the Paso Doble first started, there was a military element to it. So to make it look sort of something, we want you to sort of just don't laugh, don't give the impression you're enjoying it. Just go for it, and that's where. And so it was most. I mean, she did all the choreography, but she was absolutely brilliant at knowing where the jokes will be and where the funny bits will be, and it obviously meant that we had to look serious while we were doing it.
But you nearly won it. You walked. You were scared. You're not scared, but you were worried that you might win it because of your appeal to the voters, so to speak.
No, there's a
and much better dancers would be ejected.
Exactly. No, so it then became ridiculous because, of course, the more the judges attacked me, the more I could then say, well, of course, like all judges, they quickly lose contact with reality. And, they weren't going to frighten me. I mean, how could they? No, to me, the point is, if you live the life I've led, you're very at home in a studio with people pretending to hate you. Hold on. I mean, that isn't... but for me, that is not... There are things that do frighten me, lots of things that frighten me, but that particular play is part of my, playbook.
John, lastly, humour me with some quick-fire answers and quick answers. I mean, they can be elucidating. 4 or 5, 6, here we go. Thatcher or Blair?
Oh, both. No, I know.
Yeah,
no, it's too difficult.
Yeah, it's so different. Alan Bennett, Jonathan Miller?
Oh, no, Alan Bennett, no.
Oh, yeah, of course. Given what you said earlier before. Bernard Ingham or Alistair Campbell?
Alistair, yeah.
Why?
Because he really was a political animal. I mean, Bernard became a political animal, but in fact, what Alistair had was a very good idea, not only of what Labour could do, but how much the Labour voters would like, what they would like. And so he was, in his own way, him and Mandelson together, Peter Mandelson, they were just natural, instinctive political experts. And they're quite rare. You have to be detached. You mustn't get too wound up in it. Now, Alistair was, of course, very, very political and very pro-Labour and all that sort of thing. But he and Mandelson together had this cool detachment of, try this. What about that? And if you'd asked them, if you didn't know them and you talked to both of them and you said, well, look, what should John Major do, right? Or how should this work out? They would give you an answer which was a pure technical advice answer. They knew about how politics worked. And if you listened to them, you couldn't necessarily say what their view was of the situation or the people. And that's, of course, the essence of political judgment. That's how you do it. But you don't get cross. You keep absolutely detached. And then you can say, we could do that, or we could move there. Or if we do it in 2 days' time, by then, that would be right. But I feel, no. Just calm down. Let's just wait for a moment. Let's wait for a few minutes and then discuss it.
Might sound a bit left field, this one. Johnson or Boswell? You know why I'm asking
I know.
it.
No, I do know that. No, of course, it's Dr. Johnson. No, Boswell had his brilliance. Of course, he wrote the first autobiography of Dr. Johnson. I was president of the Johnson Society, so I know all about this.
People might think I was talking about Boris, but
No. Dr. Johnson he was a fantastic character. He reminded me a great deal of my stepfather, and he was a brilliant, sort of very, very clever man, but very funny man, and Johnson was all that.
And lastly, this is looking to the future as well, and what we've just discussed, Strictly or Celebrity, i.e., are you ever ending up in the jungle?
Oh, no, because people would know what I'd do. You see, they would know. If people who studied me on Strictly knew that was what I was how I was going to play it, and you've got to have you've got to keep that element of surprise and control. And if they then thought, oh, he thinks he's going to do well, they'll vote you down. You see, so the seeds of your own destruction are there if you made that kind of choice. No, you wouldn't. That would be stupid. That would be politically naive and silly.
John, what can I say except for a true legend? Pleasure to meet you. What a chat. Let's do it again.
Thank you.